and welcome to another Game Nexus arcade video. Today we're going to be taking a look at this system here, which is the Taito Type X2 hardware that in today's video will be running Street Fighter 4. I'll give you a brief overview of what this whole thing runs. Is the standard Street Fighter 4 spec is going to be a Core 2 Duo E6400, GeForce 7900 GS, and I believe this particular one runs a gigabyte of memory, so it's like a Windows XP embedded system. It's fairly low spec for today's standard, but back in 2008 when the game was new, that was a decently beefy PC spec. But you know, today you look at it and you laugh. But here's our screen up here. You'll see on the bottom of the screen Street Fighter 4 version 1.0 standard. And if we go ahead and go into our game options here, fairly normal stuff. I just left everything absolutely default for the purposes of this video. And I'm going to have to probably get the audio as a intro thing, which of course if I did, you probably heard one of the background music tracks in the beginning. But I'll take a quicker look at the system and then we'll get right into the gameplay. But more or less, it's like a standard computer. Like you'll see here it is. It's got like mouse and keyboard ports, serial port, the audio comes out of here, this is the graphics card, and then of course in the bottom here, similar to Lindbergh, is the JVS card, which does all the input-output. But that's the basics of the system. And then all I really have to do on the system here is just basically get back into the system here, get out of test mode. My system is actually equipped with a multi-kit, so all of the games are on the system, which makes my life a lot easier when it comes to any of this making a video on the game, because dedicated hard drives with Taito Type X2 games are typically a bit more expensive, but this system that I bought like this came with the multi-kit already installed, so let's go ahead and get out of this, and let's get right into Street Fighter 4. The original version. And if you saw that little thing there, it's basically the Taito Type X2 system trying to network to other systems, because you could have two systems networked and have like a versus setup, so each person has their own screen. But of course I uploaded the intros in a separate video, and let's get right into this. And right into Street Fighter 4 you get arcade mode, beginner mode, or trial mode. Of course we're going to do arcade mode. And you only get 16 characters in this original arcade version. There was another 8 characters added for the console versions, and Seth was added as a playable character, of course, because that's common in console versions of arcade games. And now, of course, other than Street Fighter EX and Street Fighter EX2 and EX3, and then of course all the various versions of those games like Plus and Alpha and everything, this was the first time Street Fighter was like really a mainstream 3D fighting game. But of course they played it safe here, where they decided to keep everything like moving in a 2D way and made the 3D models like more artistic looking, so they looked more like they were basically 2D characters, but everything was 3D. So more or less they just kind of went the roundabout way of making it a 2D, 3D game, if you will. So it looks modern, but it actually
moves like an older type game, and people wouldn't be like, oh well, this HD like 2D graphics look great, but why is everything 3D now and then this one is like only 2D? Why would we even want this anymore? But then again, games like Guilty Gear for quite a while were 2D and that was fine. And I always like all these quotes here. I actually had to go into the settings and change it to English. And now this whole game runs on something called the MT Framework engine. Of course, the original release here of Street Fighter IV hit Japan arcades July 18th of 2008, August 12th of 2008 in America, and then eventually would be released on game consoles quite a bit later. You would have your PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 versions in February of 2009. February 12th in Japan, February 17th in North America, and February 20th in Europe. And then it would be all the way until that July that the Windows version hit the scene. July 2nd in Japan, July 3rd in Europe, and July 7th in North America. And then eventually they released a version for iOS, which is like the iPhones and everything, iPads, March 10th of 2010, and then the Android version, apparently, it's indicating it only came out in Japan on May of 2012. And now this is one of those new characters for Street Fighter IV, El Fuerte, there's Crimson Viper, and a few of the other ones. Now, as I was saying, the Taito Type X2, when I mentioned this in the beginning of the intro, is basically a Windows XP Service Pack 2 embedded machine that runs on an Intel Core 2 Duo clocked at 2.13 gigahertz. A NVIDIA GeForce 7900 GS graphics card on the PCI Express bus, and as I said, I believe when I saw in the actual settings when the system was booting, that it ran 1 gigabyte of memory, but it can be up to 2 gigabytes for certain games. And of course, everything runs off of a SATA hard drive as well. And the as I showed in the intro there, you have the JVS standard graphics card, which, I mean the JVS standard input card, which your regular JVS I/O board would hook up to. Or in the case of today's gameplay, I was just using OpenJVS because it's just a lot easier to do that instead of having to wire up the whole JVS setup. And the good thing about this game is it actually runs in dual resolutions. You can have the game run in VGA resolution for something like a Sega Net City, or you can have it run in HD resolution, which is 1280 by 720, which was considered HD at the time because it was kind of cutting edge. And something like a Vuelix or even like a Namco Noir cabinet would run that. So if you wanted it to be widescreen and HD and everything, you could do that, or you could upgrade your legacy NewNet City or whatever other old arcade high resolution, which is the 31 kilohertz, to this game in just regular full frame mode. And I can remember back when I used to work in Best Buy, we actually set up a computer with the Street Fighter benchmark running, and it would continuously run the part where Ryu would be fighting like Sakura, I think. And whenever I see that, I kind of think about that, because we just basically built a computer and ran the free benchmark on there just to show people what a gaming computer at the time could kind of look like, because, you know, some people thought of PC games as like simple things, not something that'd be like high res as like Street Fighter 4 here. And another thing that was actually kind of cool is I didn't think I'd do so well, but I ended up actually not losing a full like fight except for like the end boss. I lost to Seth like a lot, and I think I ended up fighting Seth a lot more than any other character in the whole game. Like the whole run combined was shorter than me finally beating Seth, because he's just one of those characters that has so many different crazy cheap moves that he can get you with that yeah, he ended up taking like a good half hour to finally you know, get the winning formula, if you will. But another thing about Ryu here is a lot of the Street Fighter 4 concept art I actually had used for my big Ryu action figure, which is like 15 inches tall, and I even like put those symbols on his belt and everything, because there was that much space that I could actually do it. And that's another thing I was just thinking of, and I'm kind of looking up at him when I'm doing this commentary right now, because I tried to get all those details down pretty well, because, like, not even just the symbols on his gloves, but also, as I said, on his belt. But I can remember, like, nobody knew Street Fighter, the original game. It was kind of a complete unknown, if you will. And then Street Fighter 2 was the crazy breakout success one. Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Street Fighter Hyper Fighting, Super Street Fighter 2, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, or X if you're in Japan. But yeah, that was like the crazy Street Fighter for a good while there. And you didn't even get like Street Fighter 3 really becoming a thing in most arcades that I actually had gone to. And then here's the winning quote here.
Your destiny will be determined here. Who will come out on top?
And I'm not sure if this is because I have it set to English or if they just standardized it by now, but he's Balrog instead of M. Bison. And Mike Tyson never was actually mad about that. In fact, he was actually quite honored they'd make a character like inspired by him. And it seems like to this day, unless like one of his publicists or one of his people would have been against it, but Mike Tyson himself probably would have not stood against this M. Bison slash Balrog character. But as I was saying, after the whole Street Fighter 2 craze like kind of ended, if you will, what had happened was, like, you saw enough of Street Fighter Alpha, and then I think I might have seen Street Fighter EX once in an arcade, but like nobody was playing it and it wasn't really all that popular. But the basic gist of it is the only ever time I saw Street Fighter 3 in an arcade is it was that like original arcade machine, which the marquee was actually just labeled 3, and I think it had a picture of one of the new characters on it. And like I saw it and I was like, I don't know what that game is. And then I went over and I was like, oh, I guess this is that Street Fighter 3 I heard about. And of course, since Sony PlayStation had no chance of running Street Fighter 3, then eventually got a port to Dreamcast, which was that console that like you had a friend who had, but nobody I knew really had a Dreamcast and a copy, any of the copies of Street Fighter 3, so it wasn't until like much later that I had any experience with that game. And it was kind of one of those, they tried to clear the whole roster and start anew, and it just never really, except for like the competitive scene or the really hardcore Street Fighter fans, did it ever really catch on from what I understand. And of course they had 3 versions of that as well, and then eventually you didn't hear about Street Fighter 3 anymore, and a good amount of time passed before the rumors of a Street Fighter 4 started, and you know, here we are today looking at this game. Finally, Street Fighter 4 became a thing. And now we're going to see his win quote here.
Your destiny will be determined here. Who will come out?
And honestly, it might be an unpopular opinion, but I personally consider like Street Fighter 4 to be Street Fighter EX4 because it kind of continues more of the lineage of the 3D Street Fighter games than it does the 2D. Because in an alternate universe, they would have like made a Street Fighter 4 that was completely 2D, and then this would have been like Street Fighter EX4, and then like Street Fighter 5 and 6 would have been EX5 and EX6 because they're completely 3D. And the purists would have had their like completely 2D Street Fighter games to continue to play, but that never happened. And they shifted to the 3D, as I said, and everything is completely 3D now, up to and including Street Fighter 6, and I would imagine eventually Street Fighter 7. But, yeah, in an alternate universe, for all we know, this could have been Street Fighter EX4 and not Street Fighter 4. Because that's one thing that Capcom seemed to have a problem with when it came to Street Fighter, making a 4th entry in any series. Because you gotta remember, at the point before this was made, we had Street Fighters up to 3, then we had Street Fighter EXs up to 3, and then we had Street Fighter Alphas up to 3, and Capcom seemed to be like allergic to 4, and then eventually we got Street Fighter 4. But that's why I was saying, like, you could, in a way, consider this Street Fighter EX4, because that series never, like, truly ended, if you will. Because this is, like, kind of the culmination of the 2D and the 3D, and it kind of just combines it into one, so it's basically the spiritual successor to both series.
Now fight your rival. Your destiny will be determined here. Are you ready?
And then, of course, Rufus here is another one of the new characters in Street Fighter 4 that was not in any of the previous entries in the series. So, one thing that was always funny is in the console version, I would always have everyone's dialogue in Japanese except for Rufus, because I just enjoyed when he was like, Galactic Tornado! Space Opera Symphony, and it just like didn't hit the same way in Japanese because it just like his line sounded so absolutely cheesy in English that I just loved it. But yeah, Rufus is one of those really fun characters to play as and actually play against. But a lot of people were kind of like sad about how we only had 16 characters in the arcade version of Street Fighter 4, so that's why you got a whole 8 characters added for the console version. And that made a lot more people happy with the new characters instead of having just 16, which consists of a bunch of Street Fighter mainstays, and then you have these brand new characters. Each alliteration of the game, of course, added more characters. So, like your Super Street Fighter 2, your Super Street Fighter 4, your Super Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition, because what had happened was Super Street Fighter 4, I believe, actually hit consoles first, and then they made a arcade version of it, and they added a couple more characters, and then they made a updated arcade version, which I think was arcade version 2012 or something weird like that, and then of course it all culminated with Ultra Street Fighter 4. which added a couple more characters and more stages and everything. But it's just funny when you think about that, when you have these games which are in the arcades first, and then sometimes it'll be on the consoles first, and they have to pull all the console content onto the arcade and make that the new version of the game, if you will.
Your destiny will be determined here. And the battle begins.
And if you remember our Game Nexus podcast that me and Inyufe used to run way back in the day, one of our first ever video episodes of that was Street Fighter 4. We actually just did some online gameplay of the two of us playing against each other, and that's one thing that playing this game again kind of reminded me of. But yeah, we only did that for a little while because everyone makes video game podcasts, and I think it was just the two of us just had too much to do eventually, and we just couldn't get back together to do it. But if you were wondering about Seth here, he was known as the Puppet Master. He's the new boss character. He is the CEO of SIN, the weapons division of Shadowloo, which is that company that Bison was always the master of. His body has been modified using advanced technology, and his special moves and techniques are used by other characters, so he probably stole those, I would say. And I can remember when I first played this on PlayStation, no, Xbox 360 would be my first version of this. I thought this guy was legitimately absolutely impossible, because I could remember even with my best character who got added in the console version, Cammy, I couldn't make heads or tails of his moves, and it was just so crazy to actually eventually beat this dude. And as I mentioned earlier, it legitimately took me more than a half an hour when I was playing this gameplay to actually beat him, so it's not as seamless as it looks here. And unlike Virtua Fighter, it doesn't actually give you the, how do you call it, the time that it took, so it looks like I just got all the way through without a loss. But here's the ending. And I could most certainly say Street Fighter 4 is a really great game. If you've never had a chance to play it on PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, or even some of the newer versions on the newer consoles. It's a very fun time, and it's definitely got to be one of the best modern Street Fighter games. I played a little bit of 5 and a little bit of 6, but this is definitely one of the top of the line ones, so I would really highly recommend it. And if you're as crazy as me and can find a Taito Type X2 system and play it on that, by all means go for it. But yeah, this has been another Game Nexus arcade video, and I shall see you later. Bye.